Alrighty, everyone. Welcome to our retail masterclass that we're going to be running through today on this webinar. What we're going to be covering specifically is capacity planning for retail managers. So workforce capacity planning, what can you do if you're in retail management to promote this and do the best job that you can matching the supply and demand of labor in your business. But we're going to get into it. Quick sort of overview of what we'll be covering today, so you can sort of see what you're in for and make sure you can pick the parts that are going to be the best for you. So what we'll be covering. So what is capacity planning? We'll start off with a few definitions. If you've never heard of the term before, that's totally fine. We'll be running through that. Again, if you're an industry veteran and you deal with this stuff day in, day out, hoping we can sharpen the sword a little bit for you as well. We're going to be going through the levers of capacity planning. So what are the bits in your business that you can control to make sure you have the right number of staff in the business at all times? So we'll be running through that. We'll do a quick pause in the middle there for just working out, okay, why do we need to be thinking about this stuff now? What's happening in the news cycle? Why is this relevant? And we can sort of contextualize that a bit before we then dive into our 5 top tips for better capacity planning. So all of that will be in there. Any sort of questions they get asked through there, we'll collect those and in an overtime segment, we'll answer them. But for today, we'll be, and for this recording, we'll be focusing on those 4 areas of there. So strap in. We will start with just a really quick introduction to Quorbit. So, why listen to us about this? So we are a software business. We specialize in strategic workforce planning software, which essentially means that we help large businesses across the retail, QSR, warehousing and logistics and healthcare spaces to plan their talent strategy. So we do everything from labor budgeting through to labor modeling, capacity planning, which is the topic of our webinar today. And as you can see, we work with businesses globally, and we specialize in sort of the very large and the very complex. So today we're going to be picking a couple of stories from and a couple of insights from the retail businesses that we work with. But we've got a lot of experience across lots of these domains, and we see a lot of these challenges day in, day out with the types of clients that we work with. So a lot of the stuff that we'll be running through today is coming directly from the field and the engagement with some of our clients. So with that out of the way, what is capacity planning? What is workforce capacity planning anyway? Why does it matter to you? I'll take this second slide first, just to introduce a quick definition, really. So this is coming from me. So capacity planning is the science of getting the right number of people in the right place at the right time to service your demand in a way that optimizes profit and performance. Now that's quite a mouthful. So what I might do just right off the bat is unpick some of this definition. So principally what we're talking about here with capacity planning, workforce capacity planning, is balancing the supply and demand of labor. So making sure that you have the right number of people in the business and they're working in the right places, clearly at the right time. So both today, over the next coming weeks and months and years. So we really want to be looking and planning for the long term. But really what we're trying to do is pull apart this sort of chicken and the egg scenario where we're trying to optimize profit and performance in the business. So, clearly, if you are looking at your labor spend, you're looking at the number of staff you have in the business as a cost. Obviously, one way to minimize that cost is to run down the amount of staff that you have and sort of operate on a sort of skeleton staffing. Now that's fine, but what you might find is service demands might drop. You're sort of less able to facilitate sales from customers and do the upsells and give them the high quality customer experience that they might need in order to spend more with you. So actually you'll end up seeing sales drop. So what we're trying to do here is find the right number of staff in your business that balances that. So it gives customers a really great quality of service, but doesn't overstaff to the point where we start slipping on some of our labor and profit KPIs. So we're trying to find that right level there. And what I'm wanting to be exploring today is how we can consider that as a science. So, rather than doing this sort of by gut feel or so anything like that, we can actually look into the numbers, and we can plan and we can model exactly how this is going to work in your business. So we're really going to be diving into the science of what that looks like today. Going back one slide, I will just contextualize this as well in terms of the time horizons that you might be looking over when you're doing your planning. So, when we think about long-term planning, that might be anything from, up to a year, up to 5 years, really. And when we're doing long-term planning, that's normally when there's sort of a financial operation sort of edge to it. So finance and operations teams might be coming together to, for instance, work out the budget for the next year, or do some cost planning in terms of opening new sites, or making investments in the business over the long term. So that's really a sort of labor budgeting type activity, where we might be looking at, okay, where can we invest in terms of boosting profitability? So that's one side of the spectrum. All the way over the other side of the spectrum, in the short term, that's where we might be looking at what's happening today, what's happening over the next week or couple of weeks. And this short-term planning, is really sort of expresses itself through scheduling. So this is where you might be using your workforce management tool, to schedule in the staff who are working on the shifts and what sort of tasks that they're going to be performing on those shifts. So that's really sort of day-to-day operations type thing. What we're really going to be covering in this webinar is the medium term, which is sort of that 6 weeks to 6 month period out. And that's what we're going to be talking about capacity planning. So, what is your workforce and your workload capacity in order to deal with the demand that's coming in? And we're going to have a focus today on sort of recruitment planning. So, what do we need to be doing to get new staff into the business, retain our current staff, and make sure that we're able to sort of balance that out over the couple of weeks. So if you're thinking about, when this applies, it's over that medium term. So far enough out that you have the ability to recruit, but not so far out where, the actual demand numbers start making less and less sense and are less accurate. Okay, so further contextualizing this, if you're brand new to this, it can be helpful to sort of spot some of the telltale signs that you might be getting capacity planning wrong. Now, clearly, there's lots of different drivers here, so there might be other reasons why these are issues in your business. But if there's a couple of them lighting up, amber or red, it might be pointing to a need for doing this a bit better. So I'm going to go through each of these quickly. Right at the top here, a really big one that we see often with clients is sort of poor control of holiday accrual and absences. Now, so wherever you are in the world, there might be different legislation that guides this and different policies in your business. But generally speaking, one of the big things you want to try to avoid is having a scenario where all of your staff are trying to take time off during your busiest period of the year, and sort of depleting the amount of staff that you might have in your business, or sort of running up large amounts of absences. Now that can be because staff are accruing holiday throughout the year, and they might get caught at the end of the year if they haven't sort of used it up, or there might be seasonal effects. But we're really trying to guard against this. And if you're seeing this coming up in your business, it might be that we haven't done a good enough job in terms of planning sort of the release of holiday throughout the year. So we'll be talking about that. The second one is somewhat related, which is, if you've basically had a peak demand event, so maybe you've in the run up to Christmas, you've hired lots of staff, or there might be sort of other events throughout the year where you get really busy and you hire in advance of. If you find that you've got large numbers of excess staff after that event, so you've ramped up staffing, but you haven't been able to ramp it down as effectively, that might point to another issue with capacity planning, which is we're not managing our contract mix properly. So we're not making provisions for the fact that these demand events kind of wax and wane, and we might need to look into that in terms of optimizing around there. The third one, this is sort of an indirect metric here, but in terms of your recruitment metrics that are suffering. So when I talk about recruitment metrics, I'm talking about time to fill roles, the actual fill rate by the actual expected date that you've got there, and some other sort of softer things around the quality of the hires that you're bringing in, and the sort of talent pool that you can draw on. What we find here is if you're in a very reactionary space where you need to hire staff when you absolutely desperately need them now, and you're not really able to sort of plan further in advance, you're going to be putting a lot of pressure on the recruitment team in order to sort of scramble to come up with the staff and the labor that you need for that. So we can help with that by pushing that window out a bit further. And what we'll run into today is how that can actually become a bit of a virtuous cycle and actually improve things throughout the business. Final two, so missing performance targets through understaffing or overstaffing. That's fairly clear. If you don't have enough staff to service the customers that you've got, you're going to be providing a lower quality of service. And we might be missing performance targets on the sales side. On the swing side of that, if we're overstaffing, we can be giving customers the best experience they've ever had, but we might be overspending in terms of labor. So that one's fairly straightforward. And then the fifth one, not finding time for training and development. This is a key one that we see in terms of, one, either having staffing levels so low that you're not able to backfill staff when they're being trained, or not really being able to measure the impact of training and development on productivity, which is really what that activity is in terms of trying to boost our productivity of our staff, which means we can do more with less over time. So these are 5. There may be more. Most definitely will be more, but these are the ones that we sort of see come up day to day when we're speaking to clients. So if you're coming across any of these or multiple, then this webinar should definitely help you get a grip on that. And then just before we dive in, I just wanted to make a really quick sort of side note here. Now, a lot of what we're going to be talking about today is sort of going to be implying that you're able to do some very, either basic or even more complex and accurate labor modeling and demand forecasting. Now, what I mean by that, at the top, demand forecasting, it means that you've got the ability in your business to predict with some degree of accuracy how busy you're going to be. Now, clearly, as that time frame expands, so you're going to be it's going to be a lot easier for you to predict how busy you might be over the next sort of days and weeks, as opposed to months and years. But the fact that you have some practice inside your business doing this is critical. And then on the labor modeling side, it's really important that you're able to take that demand and you have some sort of labor model or a series of rules that determines how much labor or how much workload is actually being created, how much demand you have for labor based on your demand drivers. So sales, footfall, orders, that sort of thing. Now, we won't be covering this in too much detail today, but you need to make sure that you've got some form of accuracy in there. And if you're finding that you're sort of wildly inaccurate on the demand forecasting or labor modeling side, we may need to fix that for you first. So if that is a problem for you, please reach out and let us know. But that's we're going to be assuming that's all in hand today when we start talking about capacity planning. Right. So we've covered what is capacity planning. We've sort of gone into how that sort of impacts your business, what sort of effects you might be having, and what sort of planning horizon that we're talking about. We're going to go into now the levers of capacity planning. So what is in your control that you can use to make sure you're able to balance that supply and demand of labor, which maximizes that profit and performance inside your business. Now, there are 7 in scope today that we're going to be talking about fairly briefly. Based on the last slide, there's 2 out of scope. So clearly, if you're investing in doing a better job at forecasting your demand, you're going to have a better grip on how many staff you need. That's going to help you plan better. And if you have a more accurate labor model, so based on the demand that you have, if you're more accurately able to calculate how much labor you need, that's going to go a long way to helping you as well. But those are not something that we're going to be diving into today. Probably the topic of a separate webinar. But these 7 here, so contract type, attrition, recruitment, overtime, holiday and absences, training and skills, and productivity are the 7 levers I'm going to be walking you through now that will help you maximize that. So if we start with recruitment, that's a pretty clear one when we start thinking about capacity planning. So if we're in a scenario where we don't have enough staff to meet this expected demand that we have in our business, we need to go out and we need to bring more staff into the business, clearly. That could be external recruitment. So that could be us, go out to the market and offering jobs, or it could be internal recruitment as well. So we could be moving people into new roles across geographies, anywhere where we're basically moving new staff into a role. We're talking about recruitment. And we've always sort of thought that was fairly straightforward, but actually how we recruit is really key to capacity planning. So as I've said here, anything that threatens our ability to get the right people in the right place at the right time threatens our ability to control our staffing level. So if you're in a position where you need to increase the capacity of your workforce in order to respond to demand, that's going to erode your control of that. So a couple of things to think about here, just to get a more well-rounded view of recruitment. Think about your recruitment metrics. So as I mentioned before, your time to hire, your fill rate, any of the fees. So if you were using sort of agency or recruiters to help you here, what are some of the fees around that? And then some metrics that you can have to assess the quality of candidates and the quality of the talent pool. If you can be thinking about that, those are all health metrics and all indicators which kind of feed into this capacity planning bit. Because if you know how long it takes to hire and what the percentage fill rate and the quality of the staff there is going to be, you can factor that into your planning so that you know how long that capacity planning window needs to be in advance. And if there are certain fees that go into this, obviously there's sort of overheads for the recruitment team, and that actually goes into this broader concept of optimizing for cost that we're going to be talking about. Whereas there might be other things that we can do in our business that means that we don't need to recruit, and we can actually save costs there. But wherever we're going with this, we're going to be incurring some sort of cost. So there's a balance there and optimization that we can do. Thinking about agency versus in-house staff, if you use a mix of those at the moment, if it's all in-house or using a large contingent of agency, there's going to be differences there in terms of how you look at that, and then sort of external versus internal hires. But one of the big things that we'll be talking about in one of the next slides here is what contracts are you hiring on. So that's going to be really critical there, and that will actually impact all of your recruitment metrics as well, in terms of the lead times for these. And what we're also going to be going into here in terms of our top tips is, how can you create positive feedback loops through better training here around recruitment? And that's like a big one that we want to explore, and we want to help you promote in your business there. Now we'll go on to attrition. So attrition really is the other side of the coin of recruitment. It's a fact of life. We know that staff are going to be leaving the business over a certain point of the year. When we look at a sort of company level, if you've got lots of staff there, that sort of attrition rate starts to become something that we can model and we can actually predict at a sort of company-wide level. Harder to do at the store level potentially, or if teams are smaller. But we know that when staff leave the business, they're taking with them valuable skills. They can be doing so in a way that disrupts our ability to serve customers. So we really want to get out ahead of that and factor that into our capacity planning, and put that into the model basically. So really sort of now more than ever, we need to be doubling down on retention. Like if we can keep staff in the business for longer, that gives us more control over the actual level of staffing that we have. So similar to recruitment, and it allows us to sort of tamp down on that a little bit and give us a bit more control over it. But there are a couple of additional things that you can think about here in terms of getting a bit of better control over attrition in terms of that lever of capacity planning. So first one, clearly nailing your HR processes. So this is something that you should be thinking and probably already are thinking about a lot. Onboarding, in terms of surveying staff, obviously tracking the reasons by which they leave. So if there's certain reasons that staff are giving you in terms of they're leaving, we can actually factor that back into our capacity planning as well. So for instance, if they're leaving because they don't feel like they're getting enough hours on their contract, that's something that we can take a look at in terms of the contracting side. So sort of falling out of the back of that, how could you use flexible contracts, for instance, to boost your retention? So, we know that staff might be in a position where they want to leave the business. If we're able to sort of move them over onto a contract that's more suitable for them, they may decide to stay with us. And that actually gives us a really powerful tool for holding on to staff and sort of driving those attrition rates down. And of course, we never like to see attrition happen in the business, at least sort of involuntarily. But there is a silver lining to all of this, which is that whenever someone leaves the business, and of course, whenever we hire someone as well, that gives us an opportunity to rebalance our contract mix. So it basically allows us to look at the mix of contracts and make sure that they are, that's serving us and serving the clients and the customers, or rather, sorry, our employees that are on those contracts, and making sure we're building in that sort of flexibility into the business, which we'll get into on the contract side. But just to underscore this on the attrition side, it is a fact of life. We can model it. We want to make sure that we're driving it down and we're actually controlling it. Otherwise, we're less in control of our overall staffing level. All right, so we've spoken about contracts and contract types a little bit already, and now's a good chance to sort of dive into that more. So, the types of contracts that you're offering to staff, whether they're permanent, temporary, all the sorts of hours that are on there, so full-time, different variations of part-time, or sort of no fixed hour contracts, that actually determines the headcount that you need in the business. So your labor model will determine your workload, so how many hours of work need to be done, but who are actually going to do that and how many of those staff we need, that's determined by the contract type, which means your contract type is actually a massive driver of a lot of this capacity planning equation, because it determines the flexibility of your workforce. So if you've got a varying demand, how flexible are we to actually sort of flex up and work those additional hours versus the cost. So we know that different contract types and it costs the business different amounts, either because staff are having to work more overtime on a full-time contract, or potentially paid a higher rate if they're given less certainty around their actual hours. So getting this right and optimizing this for your business, at every point when you get one of those events in terms of staff leaving or joining the business, that's really critical. So a couple of things to think about. You can look at your overtime usage. You could think about, right, are we able to draw on overtime during periods of peak demand, or do we have fairly stable demand but we're constantly using overtime at the moment? That could be a sign, for instance, we don't have enough staff, but we can get into that. Think about how this impacts your hiring. So maybe our recruitment metrics are different, whether we're hiring full-time or part-time staff or temporary. Might take longer, or might be harder to find sort of permanent full-time staff, whereas there might be more temporary staff out there sort of willing to work that can sort of plug gaps in our capacity. And obviously that's going to be really dependent on the contract type. The other thing as well to think about is that supply and demand of labor, based on your demand as it goes up and down throughout the year. So if you've got more of a skew towards sort of part-time, temporary staff, or maybe even sort of casual staff, that's going to give you a lot more flexibility that allows you to actually flex up and and sort of adapt to periods of peak demand, whether they're coming because it's Christmas, or whether something's just sort of come out of the blue, and you're getting a rush for a couple of weeks that you didn't necessarily expect. That's going to basically build in some flexibility for you. So if you're not doing it at the moment, it might be an option for you to consider that as a lever. But on the flip side of that, we need to consider our costs. So what are these different contracts costing us? What are the trade-offs that we can make here from a cost perspective when we're trying to build in that flexibility? So the contract type is a really interesting lever to get into. I believe we have 4 more, which I'll run through fairly quickly. So holiday and absence. I've always considered sort of holidays and absences being a hidden labor cost. Obviously, it's a liability if you're in a country where people are accruing leave throughout the year. That is a liability that's building up, and one that you sort of need to control and plan. But the main thing here is that we're avoiding that sort of nightmare situation where all of your staff are trying to take leave during a period of peak demand, like Christmas or something like that. So making sure that we can actually get control of our holidays, making sure that we're actually able to release holiday throughout the year in sort of an orderly fashion and kind of run it down before periods, peak periods. That's really important as well. Clearly there's other types of absences, so sicknesses, or there might be other things that people are experiencing. Some you won't be able to control, or you won't even really be able to predict. I think we all understand that's a fact of life. Others though, like sickness, sort of at an aggregate level, we can expect, for instance, during winter seasons that we might be seeing more flu and more absences throughout that. So we can start to think about that and plan that in across the business. I mean, if we know that it's going to happen in advance, that's something we can actually think about and prepare for. So that's one of the benefits of capacity planning here is we can actually start factoring some of this stuff in. So a couple of things to think about. Releasing holiday in an intelligent way throughout the year. And what I mean by intelligent is finding periods where demand kind of dips a little bit, where we might be sort of technically overstaffed during that period. That's a great time to get staff to take holiday, and it's good for them as well, because basically it means that they're worrying less about the rest of the team's ability to take over from them. So running that down during those periods is a great way to do that. Ensure that you're factoring in that holiday liability in your hiring plans. So if there's if something is sort of falling out of your labor model that says you need 100 staff and you hire exactly 100 staff, well, what happens when those staff in that area take holiday? So we do need to build in a little bit of oversupply there in order to backfill staff that might fall ill or might be taking holiday. This is all super obvious, but actually getting that number right and being accurate with it, that's the difference between maximizing that profit and performance piece, and also just I think being cognizant of the fact that there is this link between holiday and productivity. So if staff are going long periods of time while they're not taking holiday, that's going to impact their productivity, and I think that's fairly well documented. So having periods where staff are kind of accruing lots of holiday, that's bad because you're less able to control it. So they might well turn around and ask for long periods of absence during a peak period for the business. But also we can expect their productivity to be dropping throughout the year as well. So that's really what we want to avoid. Just take a quick sip of water there. We're on our final two, so we're running through these. Training and skills. Now, this is one of the ones I think that can make a lot of this a lot trickier. Particularly, you're going to have staff in your business at different levels of skill and training requirements. So there might be some entry-level roles that you've got. There might be some ones that are a bit more skilled. So they require training either by you or by other industry bodies. And there might also be mandatory training that people need to undertake in order to do their business. So that might be first aid certificates, or there might be other things that they need. Putting aside time to deliver that training to the staff is critical, because, for instance, in mandatory training, if they're not renewing that mandatory training, that could take them out of the workforce entirely, and then you've got sort of very unpredictable, uncontrolled releases in capacity there, which you don't want. So really, one of the ways that we think about it is, training is essentially another absence type, like holiday. When you're sending staff out for training, you're basically taking them off the front line. Potentially, you might be tying up other staff in order to train them. So it does reduce your capacity. So staff will need to come in and backfill them, but it's an investment in the productivity of your business. So what you've got there is an opportunity to, similar to holiday, is plan this intelligently throughout the year, which we've noticed there, but also kind of think about the impact about how that's actually going to have on lots of different metrics in your business, including attrition, things like that. So one of the key things there is just identifying those key skills and those key roles that you might need more time to hire for, and make sure that you're building that into the plan in terms of your capacity planning. So that's that. And then the final one, so I can leave a bit of time to talk about these top tips, is productivity. Now, clearly, everything that we've spoken about up until now really has some impact on productivity. So the staff that you hire into the business, the circumstances under which they work, the quality of their training, and the quality of kind of the skills and sort of attitude that they bring to the business all impact productivity. But clearly, there's process that people are sort of working through. And as I've mentioned here, good people stuck in a bad process is a surefire way to ruin productivity. So, as a kind of final lever, it's important to think about, what are the actual tasks and what are the actual processes that staff are doing day to day, kind of independent of, their individual performance, that actually impacts that productivity number. Because, essentially what that means is if people are stuck in a bad process, you're going to need more staff in order to service that demand. So, we might be able to re-engineer some of that, or, might be able to cut out some unnecessary tasks or remodel them in a way that sort of irrespective of the actual employees doing those tasks, we can actually improve productivity and then actually get a better handle on our capacity planning as a result. So some things to think about. If you've got a formal labor model, so you might have done a work study, labor study where you're timing task times and things like that. Might ask yourself, is it time to refresh some of those numbers? So if we're getting some of those wrong, or we've put in new processes, we haven't necessarily timed them, it's important to get a handle on that. Think about how our business model might be shifting, like particularly post-COVID, we've seen retailers move towards online retail. We're sort of doing a multi-channel, sort of omni-channel strategy here. And that might mean that less staff might be walking through the door to browse, and they might be ordering online, either via click and collect or via delivery. So you can see here if these if these demand drivers change, it actually changes the demand for labor within our business. So it's important to understand what the impacts of that are, and we might find that actually we need to be moving staff around in order to sort of compensate for that. And the third one is having a practice of sort of scientifically identifying areas of productivity improvement. So this falls out of the back of your labor modeling a little bit, but if we're identifying tasks or processes that are very slow, and we've done our homework here, we should be able to identify, okay, what could we do to improve this? What would the actual impact be on labor? And the impact that has on the capacity planning side is if you're able to move the needle on some of these bits, either from a short and medium term or in a temporary way, then that's actually going to control your ability. That's actually going to help you control how many staff you need in the business. So, an example of that might be if there are processes that you're currently doing that take a long time and deliver sort of let's say marginal benefit to customers. Maybe we don't do some of those tasks when the shop is really busy, for example. Maybe there's sort of a level of service that we can scale back just a little bit when the shop is really busy in order to compensate for that peak demand. But you'll know in your business way better than I will about what some of these productivity measures could be. All right, so we've sort of done a bit of a whistle-stop tour there of the 7 levers of capacity planning that you've got. There may well be more that you can sort of employ in your business, and I'd love to hear, which ones you find that you've got a really good control over, or which ones that you might need a little bit more support on in order to make sure that you're able to balance that supply and demand of labor and really optimize for profit and performance. But I wanted to take just a really brief moment at this point to talk about, okay, why is this important now? So, why think about this now in sort of a global context, and why is it worth sort of investing in? Now, I won't don't need to spend too much time here, but I think at this point in time we've all heard a lot about the Great Resignation. We're starting to hear about some impacts that we're seeing in terms of inflation and a really tight labor market. My point here is I think you can go on to just about any retail news site and you can see a whole list of different headlines, which sometimes can be quite contradictory. So we're seeing about the number of people working in retail falling. People see employees sort of resigning and quitting their jobs. Also we're seeing inflation hitting the high street, while some retailers are opening up new sites. And actually, we're seeing businesses kind of remodel and reshape the way that they're actually going to market, in order to do this. So, I can't predict the future. I think we've seen a lot of experts sort of be caught out during this time. The sort of point that I would underline all this with is the best thing that we can be doing is sort of investing in resiliency and agility and adaptability during these times. If you're wondering, for your business, where are we going next? And that, the answer to that is sort of impacted by global factors, clearly. But the better job that we can do in terms of controlling what we can control and adapting to it and having a plan for it, that's going to give us a lot more confidence. And if we're able to share that plan a bit more widely inside the business, that gets everyone pulling together and working on a common sort of set of problems that we can then solve. So, who knows what the future holds? You probably have a pretty good idea of where you think your business is going to go, but in terms of these sort of global trends, I think we're going through a, quote unquote, unprecedented period here. Another word we've heard about a lot. So, the more that we can actually be planning in advance for some of these things and being able to roll with the punches, as it were, that's going to put us in a much better position. So that's why I think it's important to be investing in this now. We've gone through this period of great adaptation. I don't think the pace of change is slowing down. I think actually we need better tooling and better ways of thinking about some of the stuff that makes us more agile and sort of adapts to a period of more accelerated change as we go forward. So that's why I think it's important to be investing in some of this stuff now. But we can switch gears and actually start to think about, okay, we've gone through the levers of capacity planning. What's in your control that you can actually do to balance that labor supply, maximize profit and performance. You may well agree with me that now's the time to invest in this. But at any rate, improving the agility and your ability to have better numbers around this is going to give you a lot more control. So we're going to go into what we've seen. So our 5 tips for better capacity planning. What are 5 things that you can put in place in your business today that's going to give you better control over this? And I'll just take a quick sip of water before I jump in. Right, so let's get started. 5 tips. First one here is all about optimizing your contract mix. Now, we spoke about this in the previous section in terms of exploring how the actual contracts that you offer your staff determines your headcount, and it also determines things like how flexible your workforce is. Can you flex up during periods of peak demand? But also, what's the cost implications of that? So that's going to impact all sorts of things in your business. So what are some steps that you can actually take to sort of improve your contract mix, as we call it? So the actual mix or the ratio of permanent to temporary staff and full-time, part-time, and casual contracts. How can you build in flexibility into your business in a way that's cost optimized? So the first one is to think about your needs for flexibility versus stability. So if you're in a business where demand is fluctuating a lot, clearly you're going to be in a position where your capacity needs to grow and it needs to shrink, and you need to adapt to the sort of changes there. So what's your need for sort of flexibility there, but also what's your need for stability? So do you need to be building a really high quality, high skilled workforce? Is there part of what you do that actually takes a lot to train staff and retain them? And how critical is culture in your business around that? So you're going to be juggling those 2 things, like how flexible do we need to be in terms of bringing new staff into the business and flexing up, versus how stable does that core need to be in terms of investment. So that's a place to start, just being honest with yourself about what those needs of the business are, and you'll know that. From there, it's knowing your recruitment metrics and the associated costs. So yeah, what's your time to hire? What's the fill rate? What are all those things? If you know that can actually help you start making decisions around, who basically which contracts are the best to hire. If we're in periods where we need to find staff quickly, maybe we should be leveraging sort of more temporary staff, or staff on sort of more flexible contracts, because we've seen in the data that it's actually quicker to hire those staff. Or if we have those needs for stability, and we know the metrics around it, we know we need to look for more skilled or more senior or permanent staff further in advance. So we can actually start factoring that in to the capacity planning equation, and actually make more sensible decisions around that. The third one is just to give yourself more options. So if you're if some reason your business, the policy has always been to use permanent full-time staff, you might find that the talent market for that at the moment may be drying up, or you might find that you're needing to bid up the price of the contracts for that, up to maybe record highs in terms of the labour shortages that we're seeing at the moment. Chances are you're probably not in that position. You're probably offering a few different contracts, but the more options that you provide, one, the better, and if you're able to offer those to staff, the better your ability to sort of retain staff on those different contracts. But also it just gives you more options in terms of more closely matching the demand and supply of labour, because you're able to pick the contracts that are most appropriate for that. So I would just sort of employ you to challenge some of your assumptions there around, what you need, what you can be working with. If you can create more options for yourself, that's going to give you more choices in terms of how you actually, pull those levers of capacity planning. And the fourth one, which I think is really the main one from here, is building that agility into the business and using that silver lining to re-optimize after recruitment and attrition. So if someone leaves the business, we're not we don't necessarily need to just rehire on the same contract on the same conditions, basically trying to find someone who looks exactly the same to replace that person. That is a great moment to sort of pause and think, okay, do we need another part-time permanent person, or for instance, because we know that we're coming into a period, maybe we need to hire some more temporary, or maybe it's time to secure more labor in our business by going to a full-time contract. So I would just say use those points to pause and think about, in that moment, what's the best person to rehire. You can then look at your recruitment metrics and work out, okay, when do we need them? And based on that, when do we need to be talking to the recruitment team? That can differ by the contract length. And if you've got those different options there, maybe for instance, you could be retaining, or you could be asking other staff to switch onto contracts that better suit their needs, which actually drives down attrition. So these are all options that are available to you if you're willing to play around with the contract mix and optimize that for your business. So that's a big tip there that you can be investing in if you're not already. Okay. Number 2, spot capacity gaps further in advance. Now, clearly, time is your friend here when you're planning this stuff. The further in advance that you can be, identifying undersupply or oversupply of labour, the more time you have to actually do something about it. So from a recruitment perspective, you're giving your recruitment team more time to find the right people. From an oversupply perspective, that's when we can start planning in holiday leave and all those sorts of bits. So the further we can push out that time horizon, the better a result we're going to be able to get here. If we can spot gaps sort of up to that 12 weeks in advance, so time horizon, that's going to give your recruitment team a lot more time there. But there's a couple of sort of practical things that we can do there if we want to sort of build in. If this is not something that we currently do, we want to get there. We want to build in this capability into the business. So the first one is thinking about your forecasts. So we're probably forecasting short-term demand, as in we might be looking at the last couple of weeks, projecting that out for the next couple. But maybe we're not doing that as rigorously over sort of the weeks and months or years sort of period. Granted, the further out that we project our demand, the less accurate it's going to be, clearly, but it's still a very good practice to do. It's something I'm sure that you're doing, and also sort of building in that sort of continuous improvement around getting those, driving those to be more and more accurate. That's going to help in terms of spotting demand fluctuations further in advance and sort of planning for them. Second one is being proactive with staff leave and training. So the further in advance that we can book things like holiday, so if we know that there's going to be an oversupply of labour, or we're just being diligent in terms of running down holiday, if we can plan that further in advance, we know further out what our capacity is going to be. And that this goes for training as well. So if we know 12 weeks now we've got lots of staff taking holiday, lots of people on training, and we can start to see, okay, we think demand is going to pick up here, then we know we can do something about that, and that's critical. Third one, kind of similar to number 2, forecasting attrition and sickness. So we know that staff are going to leave the business. We know it's a fact of life. So the further out that we're looking, we can start to do some sort of back of the envelope calculations and work out, well, at our current rates, or for instance, if we're able to forecast rates as they kind of swing up and down throughout the year, that and sickness, okay, we have some idea that we're going to be losing some staff through attrition and sickness, and then we're going to have decisions that we need to make in terms of backfilling them. So if we're forecasting that as well alongside demand, that's going to help us get an idea of what's going to happen on the capacity side as well. And the last one I'd say is factor in the productivity effects of hiring new staff. So if we're in a period, for instance, leading up to Christmas, we're hiring lots of Christmas casuals, as you will, or we're trying to build up that. We know that staff are not going to be at full sort of productivity from day one. So we can't just hire people a week before and expect and treat them like existing staff from a productivity perspective. We have to factor that in. So whether that means hiring them earlier or hiring more of them, we know that there's going to be a productivity effect there. So being able to actually quantify that and factoring that into the capacity planning side, that's going to be super helpful for you as well. All right, we've got 3 more. So number 3 is utilizing your labor oversupply. Now we've touched on this a bit today, but we know that throughout the year there's going to be parts of the business that might be sort of technically oversupplied with labor. There might be various reasons for that. No plan is 100% accurate. There might be, this might be in line with corporate strategy, so we might be ramping up for some reason, or there might just be that's in the context of a sort of broader sort of time horizon in terms of optimizing that over the long term. But the key here is if you're able to spot those oversupplies, you're actually able to make decisions to make the most of it. And that's really powerful because that's going to help us during periods of peak demand, where we're actually stretched a lot. We're going to be sort of in a better position going into those. So some of the steps that you can take to utilize your labor oversupply, so actually doing something about this and making the best decisions you can. Number 1, so just take a barometer here and work out, okay, is our oversupply of demand oversupply of labor rather because our demand is dropping? So there might be sort of a trough in terms of demand coming in. So maybe there's a Black Friday sale, and for the couple of weeks after it, we're seeing less people through the door because there's a bunch of demand that's been shifted forward. Is it because of that, or is it because we're sort of persistently oversupplied? As in, we just have quite a lot of staff that are in the business, and we've sort of overstaffed the business sort of persistently over time. Your labor model is going to tell you that, but it's really critical to know whether this is sort of a dynamic effect or it's something that's just stable throughout the year, because that will determine how you react to it. If we're just sort of assuming that this is from sort of more dynamic effects, we can start doing things like booking leave or training during those periods of oversupply. We've spoken about that a little bit already. If from that 12-week window out that we've got sort of technically oversupplied during that period, that's a great time to be encouraging staff. Going from this concept of a blackout period where we're saying you can't take leave to a green out period, saying you're very encouraged to take leave during this period. If you request leave, it will absolutely be accepted. And maybe there's other incentives we can provide in order to get staff to take leave during that time. So moving to that kind of a way of thinking. Identifying other things we can do with oversupply. So maybe this oversupply is only experienced in an area or a particular store. So maybe there's some stuff that we can be moving to support other stores during this period. That there might be sort of more localized reasons why demand might have dropped here. So if we can move staff on a temporary basis, or use some of those sort of attrition retention events, maybe offering staff if they want to leave, or say that they want to leave because they want to work closer to their home. If there's a store that is providing that ability for them, and that's a perfect way to move some of that oversupply over to the new store. So that's some options you've got there. And if all else fails, basically you've got as many people on holiday and training as you can. You've got a good balance. You've kind of got this persistent oversupply. That's a time to be investing in sort of these productivity boosting initiatives. So you know that this is a temporary thing. You know at some point you're going to be stretched again. There's going to be a lot of demand for labor, which you're going to have to flex up to. Are there some initiatives that we can take today that it will help us boost the productivity at those peaks during there? So there might be some sort of non-customer facing, sort of non-productive, as it were, investments that you can make that are going to set you up for that period there. So these are all things that you can think about for utilizing your labor supply, sort of contingent on you being able to spot that in advance. So that kind of follows on from that slide before. Right, we've got two more. So doubling down on improving retention. As I mentioned before, and I think everyone here would probably have experienced lots of issues with the Great Resignation and even just finding staff at the moment has become difficult. So the more that you can keep staff in your business, the more control you have over that, and the less of a load that you can put on your recruitment team in terms of backfilling staff and finding replacements for them. So yes, that's why basically saying, if you can actually improve some of these attrition metrics, you can actually create a positive feedback loop. And what that positive feedback loop looks like essentially is you've got less staff leaving the business, which basically gives everyone a bit more breathing room. You're able to push that planning horizon out more, which basically supports the recruitment team in terms of bringing quality staff into the business. Those quality staff stick around for longer. They might be offered more training, which makes them more engaged, more productive, and further driving down attrition. So we're less likely to lose those staff. So that's really what we want to create in the business. And there's somewhere kind of along that cycle that feeds back on itself that we need to start focusing on. So, think about kind of where that would be in your business. But some steps that you can take. So as you mentioned before, offering a flexible mix of contracts. We see this a lot. For instance, staff working 2 jobs because they want to work, say, 30, 40 hours, but they're only given 10, 15 hours. We know that eventually that staff member may want to leave that job because it's not providing them what they need. So if we can actually offer them a contract that is going to more align with the hours that they actually want to work and give them some of that stability if they want it, that's going to retain those staff and help us as well because we can plan for it. Alternatively, there might be people who want more flexibility. So if we can offer that to them and retain them, that's going to really help us as well, as long as we can do it in the context of optimizing that contract mix so that it's a win-win for everyone. Second one is identifying whether the overtime that you're currently using might be impacting morale, or might be sort of degrading productivity there. So you might find that you're actually just understaffed, you're undersupplied in terms of labor, and as a result, the whole team is working overtime. And don't get me wrong, working overtime over a short duration is totally fine. It can actually be a morale boost for staff who kind of feel like they're all kind of in it together, in order to achieve that. But if it's persistent use and it's happening all the time, it may be degrading morale and productivity in the business. So we need to recruit to fix that, if we can. And that comes down to knowing our recruitment metrics for our contract types. Number 3, improving our recruitment process. So through our greater time to hire, this is that positive feedback loop. So, if we're able to give ourselves more time to actually identify when we need to hire, we can give the recruitment team more time, and we can let them sort of do their job and sort of be less reactive and plan for that. And that's going to drive up the quality of our staff. And then number 4 is ensuring that training and development is prioritized across the business. This is absolutely critical because if staff are coming in, they feel like they're being developed, there's sort of a career path for them, they can follow along on that career path. If they're not getting that training, not getting those development opportunities, they're less likely to stick around and their productivity is likely to drop. So this is basically where I think where a lot of businesses are focusing on at the moment, very rightly. But you can kind of see how all the other elements of capacity planning actually feed into this in order to improve that. And we're on the last one here. So this is the number 5 of the 5 top tips. This one is really around rolling with the punches and investing in agility. So as I said, for why now, if I could sort of predict the what was going to happen in your business with absolute certainty, I'd probably charge something for this webinar, and probably make a lot of money along the way. But we know that that's not realistic. You'll have a really good idea, I think, being on the ground about what to expect in your business. But really, we need to roll with the punches when it turns out that our plan wasn't 100% accurate. It's not an exact science because we don't know. We can't fully quantify what the inputs are going to be. So this is why I think investing in agility is extremely important here. So that's basically what we're going to be talking about. So what are some steps that you can take to improve your planning agility so that you're able to to adapt when things don't necessarily go the right way there? Well, number one, so investing in the technology that allows you to plan for different scenarios and provide that decision support. And what I mean there is, we can sort of see when we're planning in advance, maybe that's 12 weeks, up to 6 months in advance of that medium time period. We know that there's sort of a realm of possibility here. There are some things that are pretty likely, maybe like a central case. There are some things we really don't want to happen, a worst case. There's some things we'd love to happen, a best case, and then there's sort of all gradients in there. But if we're able to use technology that actually helps us plan for that, so gives us those ranges of possibility, we can actually do something about it. So we could ask ourselves, in the worst case scenario, how could we actually staff this business? So we had a big sickness and attrition event. Could our recruitment team actually do something about that? Well, maybe not. If the answer comes back, so okay, what can we be doing to mitigate some of these risks? So being able to have those sorts of conversations is something that technology can help you do, because you need to be able to actually calculate the numbers, turn this into a science rather than sort of a gut feel type exercise. The second one, breaking down those data silos across the business. So capacity planning is something that brings together all areas of the business. So HR from a recruitment, training, retention aspect, operations, actually responsible for staffing the business and actually executing on the business plan, finance in terms of funding it, and understanding how all of that needs to be reported on and rolled up into upper management. What tends to happen is we're all looking at different data. We've all got different systems, and quite a few of us are not on the ground, on the front line, because we can see it with our own eyes. So breaking down those data silos and having sort of one system that you can bring all of that into and sort of collaborate on, that's going to be really important. It's going to go a long way into helping you make more agile decisions. Third one, promoting transparency and collaboration. So it falls off the back of breaking down those silos, but learning to work together across all those functional groups, look at the same set of data, and be actually able to collaborate on what some of these scenarios might look like. And then a fourth one is to invest in data quality and accuracy. So building a continuous improvement process around that. And the reason why this one is so important is, the quality of the decisions that you can make are only as good as the quality of the data that drives those models. So if we have very low quality data, that's going to really hinder our ability to get really crisp, sort of clean reporting out of it, accuracy out of it. And it only sort of takes one kind of element of this to kind of spoil the whole lot. So if we can look at some of the data that we're getting, if there's some things that we can do, whether it's in the workforce management system, whether it's in sales forecasting, whether it's in the recruitment system, looking at the quality of all that data and sort of driving that up and making that a continuous improvement process over time, that's going to make us more agile, because it's just going to improve the quality of the data we're able to get and the quality of the analysis that comes out of it. So everyone, that was my 5 top tips. I'm sure some of this is some things that you're already thinking about. Maybe there's some projects that are in flight already, and that's great to hear. I'd love to hear that in terms of the comments and sort of keep them coming through. But I want to speak to you just really quick on that last point before I leave you around sort of optimizing the capacity planning. So you've got these 7 levers. There's lots of different things that we could do in terms of improving our ability to plan capacity, and there might be different scenarios in your business where you might do one or another. But how do you know that you're actually making some of the best decision across that? Well, that's where we come in, and that's where one of the things that we do day in, day out with some of our clients which is provide a technology platform for strategic workforce planning, which helps them in the capacity planning tasks that we've been talking about today. What you're looking at here is a dashboard, and what we can do is basically pull in all the demand forecasts, build in the labor model to make sure it's super accurate. So we've got those things planned out. And then actually what we're able to do is crunch all the numbers. So based on everything that's happening in the business, recruitment, attrition, planning holiday, based on various productivity metrics and the requirement for training, some of our skills development, we're actually able to optimize this whole process and give decision support for the business all the way from the top, from head office down through regional and area management into the store management level. So they're actually able to see, okay, what do I need to do today in order to optimize this and make sure I have enough staff in the business. So what you're looking at here is just a very simple graphic around suggested contracts per week. So what are the amount of contracts that we need in the business, so broken down. So this business has decided to give themselves a few different options in order to build in that that sort of flexibility. And then we can provide very granular details in terms of suggested hires, all the way down up and down the estate. So how many staff do you need in every store in order to optimize that, in order to balance that supply of labor across demand? So there's a lot that we do there, and there's a lot that we can dive into, and I won't spend a lot of time on it today. But I'm saying if this is a challenge that you're having or something that you really want to take to the next level, have a chat to us over at Quorbit, because we can set you up with a demo and an environment where you can see how this would work in your business. So we want to help you really get a grip on that and help you really optimize this from a business perspective. Great. Well, we've come to the end of that. Depending on where you're watching this, leave any comments in terms of questions, and I'll absolutely answer for them. But final thoughts. I mean, this is this is a very sort of challenging and very timely thing to start thinking about in terms of balancing that supply and demand of labor. We've seen so many shocks to all of our businesses over the last couple of years, and it's we've seen it both from an economic perspective, but also from a labor supply side as well. So I'm sure there's lots of different challenges that we're all grappling with, but investing in the agility and being able to sort of understand what practical things that you can do today to help you optimize some of this is really important. So I'd love to see you again on some of our next webinars. I really hope this was valuable for you. Please let me know if it was, and stay safe out there. And yeah, I hope everyone's got a few takeaways today that they can put to work. So I will see you soon.